Over this past weekend, not only did we see the overturning of Roe v. Wade, we also saw some of the biggest pride parades and pride marches in the country, notably in New York City and in San Francisco. I want to talk to you about what happened in these cities because there were massive stampedes. People got hurt. The simple story? Not so proud, says the Daily Mail. Stampedes at pride events in New York City and San Francisco after revelers mistake fireworks and a brawl for shootings. These people are constantly being told they're the victims when they're the dominant cultural force. I don't want to say they're the majority because they're not. LGBTQIAA plus, I don't know the acronym, but you get the point. They dominate corporate press. They dominate corporate press. They dominate major corporations. This is the establishment and accepted narrative. Now, these people were panicking and screaming over fireworks because they are repeatedly being told by the media that they are the victims, that they are the ones under threat. While Brian Stelter put out a video, or he did a report on his television channel, talking about the risk of political violence. Then he mentions some leftists, but mostly just goes on to attack the right, because that's what he does, because he's a sophist. And he says, you had threats of violence at a drag queen event. Protesters showed up. Haha. Okay, sure. And people are heated, and there are threats of violence at many of these events. But around 20 plus, a couple dozen targets, pro-life targets, including many pregnancy centers, the bulk of which are pregnancy centers, were vandalized and firebombed. Some of them firebombed. But these people turn the TV on and they are told they are the victims when they're not. They're typically the perpetrators. Not always. Sometimes they're victims. Here's what happens. You look at the media, and here's the way I explain it. Fringe right-wing attacks or racist attacks or whatever ideology you want to ascribe it to. There are rare, high-profile instances where many people lose their lives. Up in Buffalo, you had a man who wrote a manifesto. In it, he talked about white replacement. That's not a right-wing position. That's not I'm talking politically. You can argue it's reactionary politics from a white majority. I accept that. And then you can argue reactionary politics are right-wing inherently, and that's where you get your overlap. Absolutely. I can accept that semantic definition. But when we're talking about economics, we're talking about smaller government or freer markets versus stronger markets and stronger government. It's not anywhere in there. It's a weird cultural issue. However, this man up in Buffalo, he was a leftist. The media doesn't tell you that, though, do they? They say he's not a leftist, he's far right. He literally wrote that he was center-left authoritarian, that he was a former communist, but now is taking race, as an issue. I would argue that it's more fair to say it's a left-wing individual because of his stated preference, because of his stated ideology and expression, and the fact that identitarianism is not left or right. Therefore, this individual was on the left. But they use this to cause fear among people, as if there's going to be attacks at pride events. Thus, when fireworks go off, these people think they're being attacked, and it's insane, causing a stampede. Now, if you've no experience with firearms, you'd probably easily mistake fireworks for firearms. A lot of people do. Sometimes I still do. I'm not that great, but it's kind of easy to tell the distinction. And it's, unless someone sets up their fireworks specifically to sound like a succession of a gun being fired, typically different. But it is hard to know, especially if you have no experience. I want to read about this. This stampede, as you can see people running and screaming, and they're saying it was horrible, fell over in the stampede. No buildings were open. We were out in the street. After what happened in Oslo, I didn't want to risk it. The way mass shootings have affected New York City. You live in a big urban liberal city with gun control. Why is this fear here? Why is there gun crime here? Something doesn't add up. I want to point something out. Take a look at the size of these crowds. I was in New York. Every business had rainbows. Every single business. This is the urban, culturally dominant idea. I also want to point out, take a look at this. There's actually a rainbow in this photograph. Isn't that cool? I mean, actually, it's kind of cool. It's kind of, weird. You have all the people dancing around at Pride with the rainbows and flags and all that stuff. And then there's like actually a rainbow in the fountain. I want to show you this image. Andrew Doyle says, for some, these flags represent diversity and inclusion. And these are the LGBTQIA2A+ or whatever flags. But for many, they symbolize an ideological movement that is hostile to gay people and women's rights, opposes free speech, legitimizes violence and bullying, and hounds people out of their jobs if they fail to conform. Andrew Doyle is correct. And we have these images. This one's from the BBC showing, which street is this? I don't know the name of the street. Downing. You have all of these LGBTQ flags lined up in huge rows. You've got, it just goes on. I can't even see how many are here, but there's like 50 just in this photo alone lining these streets. Oppressed much? Having something to fear? You are the establishment. Then you have this next photo. Now, I don't know where this one is, but this also appears to be in the UK. And you have, once again, the similar flags. These ones don't have the purple circle for, I think the purple circle is intersex or something. I'm not sure. These flags lining this street, not oppressed, not an oppressed minority. In fact, the dominant cultural force. Of course, you are starting to get, I guess, reactionary, or you're getting angry factions, and there's a real threat of violence. But for the most part, the establishment has accepted this as the norm. So I tweeted facetiously, this is literally Nazi Germany. It's funny because I'm partly hoping people think it's serious. There was somebody, where these flags are, the pride flags, there were also Union Jack flags in the UK. And everyone's like, this is fascism, because they're putting up their own flag. And I'm like, ugh, that's the joke. Not that I think this is literally Nazi Germany. That's why literally is an asterisk, because I mean it as sarcasm. But I do want to point out something before we go to that Stampede story. It's just the brown and black stripe in this flag is just so weird to me. Like, they're the only race represented on the flag. There are other minorities. It's just weird. It's a gay pride flag, trans and intersex. Why are black people on it? Black people come in all shapes and sizes and all sexualities. There's no white stripe for white people. Is the yellow stripe supposed to be Asians or something? Am I missing something here? And they have the brown stripe too. It's just culty. It is culty. So let's read the story about these stampedes. And I want to talk to you about pride. There are videos going around I can't show you, depicting one is a naked man bouncing up and down, jumping in the street naked in front of children. And or they say with children present at the event. There's another one where there's an old man, and they're all like, obese and out of shape men. He's wearing tidy whities and he's twerking. This time there are children nearby. You can see it's just whatever. We'll talk about it. We have this story from the Daily Mail. With tensions at a boiling point nationwide following Friday's repeal of Roe v. Wade and the angry scenes in Phoenix, LA, and Cedar Rapids that evening, Pride was being celebrated with a mix of defiance and trepidation. So we don't need your storytelling, Daily Mail. I'll put it this way. This country is a powder keg that we all recognize is about to erupt. That's it. The fact that fireworks went off, that people celebrating at Pride lit fireworks to celebrate, and then everyone lost their mind. It just goes to show this country is on the verge of imploding. And my personal opinion of these Pride events is that they perfectly exemplify the collapse. Yeah. Now, right now on Twitter, liberalism is a mental disorder is trending. I don't agree with that. Classical liberalism, the true sense of the word. It's what founded this nation, and it was so great. However, because of weak men, and I mean men as in humans, weak people, this country is on the verge of collapse. Pride is a breakdown, in my opinion, of order, a flowing into chaos. I don't mean LGBT pride. I don't mean people who are celebrating loving someone and having equal rights. What I mean is that these events aren't doing that. Sorry, they're just not. Don't care what you think. I have my whole life seen pride parades. When I was 10 years old, my family had a cafe on Halsted and Waveland in Chicago, very briefly. And that's Boys Town. They actually have big statues with rainbows engraved in them, like they're like street posts or something. And I've seen the Pride events. My mom told me I wasn't allowed to go outside during the Pride events because she didn't want me to see what these people were doing to each other and what they were doing in the streets. Overtly sexual. It wasn't about pride for the sexuality. It was about just chaos, lawlessness, or sex. When I was told over and over again that these events were about celebrating who you love, I said, that's awesome. You should be able to love whoever you want. I know this lesson from loving v. Virginia and coming from a family of different ethnic backgrounds, racial backgrounds. So when I was watching all of this stuff in the debate about gay marriage, I was very much in favor of people should be allowed to love who they want, mind their own business, you should leave them alone. And then I had questions. I'm like, okay, so I support all that. What I don't support is you walk outside and there's a bunch of naked people doing things to each other. And I'm not saying they're having sex. I'm saying there's like people like grabbing each other and they're dancing and smacking each other's butts and they're naked. There's people naked on bikes riding around waving to kids. There's an old man twerking for children. There are people walking up to cops and shoving their asses in the cop, and the cop is like, get away from me, dude. I remember being a little kid walking to the train and seeing anatomically correct mannequins perform like in compromising positions. And I'm just like, what does that have to do with love? Any of it? It doesn't. And it pissed me off because I felt like I was being lied to. I don't care if you want to have a sex party. Dude, I am very libertarian. Go find your place to do it privately. Mind your own business. There's a certain degree of, look, if I don't like what you're doing, I'm just going to leave. I'm not going to rain on your parade, dudes. You want to have a pride event and you want to bounce around naked and, tits flopping out and all that stuff. I'm just like, do your thing, man, but I'm out. Don't lie to me about it. Don't go on TV and say, we're just doing this because we love each other. That's why that naked guy is dancing in front of children. Bro, spare me. You're a creepo. You want to have an event where you celebrate your love? I got no issue. When they're parading around, there's like actual parades and people are just have the flag. I'm like, I don't care about that. Like, do your thing, man. Support yourself. Mind your own business. But when you have the naked people dancing, when you have, it's just debauchery. I'm just like, bro, I get it. It's an excuse and there's no enforcement. I wonder why it is we can see videos of naked men and women dancing around in front of children and cops don't do anything about it. That's why I say this is the perfect example of the collapse. For one, the hair trigger panic of people screaming at the top of their lungs and running because someone in their own event lit fireworks. Yo, these people are on edge, ready to snap. The main issue is we have laws, right? Right? So when people are dancing around naked, you'd expect laws to be enforced. They're not. Right now, Pride, what would happen? If a dude in the middle of Manhattan took off his pants and started running around, flopping around, yeah, he'd get arrested. Why then, during Pride in these cities, is it not happening? It's a breakdown. It's kind of like a purge. It's not a purge in the sense where people are killing each other, but it's in a sense where certain things just aren't enforced. They're not illegal anymore. That's why I say it's a sign of the collapse. It has little to do with two men or women loving each other or a person being transgender. Not at all. I don't think those are signs of the collapse in and of themselves. The collapse occurs when there's no more confidence in the system. If someone goes outside and says, the police will not enforce, that's it. There's no laws. The police will enforce some things, they won't enforce others. What do we see? In San Francisco and other cities in California, people go to Walgreens and just steal garbage bags full of material because no one will do anything about it. Confidence in government is collapsing. And that's what we see here. The police won't come in and arrest people who are exposing themselves to children. And that is one of the grandest examples of collapse. Because you'd think literally any person, anyone, would see a dude strip nude and dangle his meat and two veg in front of a child, and you'd be like, enough. Not anymore. Not in these cities. In these cities, people are clapping and cheering and dancing along and waving and smiling and appreciative of it. In the video, there's a man wearing a Bugs Bunny mask and he's jumping and bouncing naked. Nobody cares. They cheer for it. They are cheering for this. At the very least, I can say this. Maybe you live in a big city and you don't care that this is the stuff that happens. You say, it's none of my business. Fine, I'm sure the staunchest of libertarians would say people are allowed to be naked. Perhaps that's the conservative position. You shouldn't be nude in front of children. Like, strangers' children and things like that. And at a certain age, probably not even your own kids. I understand that parents raising their kids, the kid obviously sees the parent naked, like when the kid's being born and stuff like that. That's my point. You probably shouldn't get naked and twerk and dance around and do sexual things in front of children. I shouldn't say probably, you literally shouldn't. And so at these pride events when they're doing it, or these grooming events with drag queens, you are being shown that the distinction between the worldviews of the left and the right are so profound, there is no reconciliation. There's nothing to be done. There's no law you can pass. They're not allowed to do it, but they are allowed to do it. They're not legally allowed to do it. It's against the law, but they'll do it anyway, and no one will enforce it. And that's all that matters, which is why I say cultural enforcement is the most important thing. One person said, whoever set off fireworks in Washington Square Park in today's environment will go to hell. They did it because they were celebrating, you idiot. They're your people. Here's what I see. You come to a red area, get naked, and twerk in front of a child, and you will be beaten. And the media will probably come out and say anti-gay or homophobic attack. If somebody went up to the guy who was jumping around naked in front of children and attacked him, and I don't mean like just like punching him in the face, I mean like grabbing him and trying to remove him, they would say it was a homophobic attack. But regardless, when cultural enforcement is such that one part of the country will not enforce something and one country will, even though it's illegal nationally, you get civil war. It's exactly what we saw in the first Civil War. The Fugitive Slave Act I like to bring up all the time. Not that I think it was a good bill, and I think it was the right thing to do. The North defied it, but it did lead to a civil war. And you know what? We needed one. We needed to end slavery. Slavery needed to be stopped. And thus you get a civil war. That was back then. Today, we have different circumstances. I wonder how many people on the right would say, well, abortion needs to be stopped. And these blue states won't stop. They keep killing babies. I don't know, man. I'm not going to pretend to have all the answers. I do believe, however, that abortion will ultimately be made illegal nationwide. And the reason is, those who have sought to deny personhood rights to human entities have lost historically every single time. In which case, the end result of what we see, I think we're going to see more LGBTQ stuff. I think those rights will be codified, but I also think abortion will be made illegal. Perhaps that won't matter so much because many of these people won't be having kids anyway. Like two dudes are not going to have a child together. Two women are not going to have a child together. Someone who's been sterilized by their parents as a child, a trans child or otherwise, will not be having children either. Abortion will not be an issue for them. I guess we can only just see where things go. But my point here is the degree to which pride is mainstream and accepted it's expanded profoundly, especially since I was a kid. The degree to which these people are just breaking the law and ignoring the law, and there's no enforcement of the law, shows it's not about LGBTQ. It's about the police and the government's unwillingness to enforce what is clearly illegal, and thus we do not exist as a cohesive nation, period. Say what you want, my friends. The collapse already happened. We're just watching the slow motion fall. If someone who lives in West Virginia, next to Maryland, like where we are, when you have two distinct versions of enforcement, when one thing is illegal, you got problems. When you have in Western Maryland, they say we're a 2A sanctuary. We will not enforce these laws or whatever. The state will have to come and do it themselves. But it is illegal. You've got a collapse. We're just watching it in slow motion. There's no way for society to function when California skirts the law on immigration and then Texas doesn't. It struggles. Or when California gets extra electoral votes due to their illegal immigrant population, and then everyone else is just supposed to expect that their vote matters. Sorry, that's the collapse. Either we are a nation with a federal government that asserts itself, or we are fractured, broken, and on the verge of fighting. One may argue states have rights, and federalism will be the answer to prevent civil war. And I say you are wrong. It's one thing when Texas is like, here in Texas, you can drink beer. And then, Missouri is like, well, you can only drink beer if you're this age or, have this criteria. And then you're like, nah, it's just beer, right? If there's a law that says, like in California, jaywalking is a fine of $500. And then in Illinois, it's like jaywalking is a reprimand, no fine. The laws are different. Or they say there's no jaywalking law at all. You're like, it's not a big deal. Like, I'll just gotta make sure. I'll give you an example. New York, you can't turn right on red in New York City. I don't know about the rest of the state. In Illinois, you can. That's not that big a deal. You just make sure that if you're in New York, you know the rules of the road, and you might not. And they have no turn on red signs sometimes. You'll get pulled over, and you'll be like, I didn't know. But you can carry on your life. When some states are like, murder is okay, and other states are like, murder is not, people are eventually going to be like, the moral difference between us says to me that you are evil and you must be stopped. Civil War I, slavery. The northern states said, we will not allow the Union to be dissolved. And then abolitionists were like, it's time to go to war to end slavery. The true catalyst for the Civil War was the dissolution of the Union. That's why the war happened. The true conflict before kinetic conflict, like what led to kinetic conflict was slavery. At what point do people fight over abortion? I don't know. Anyway, here's my point. The fear, whether it's correct for the right reasons or not at these events, it shows how ready we are to collapse, how ready we are to just how close we are to real violence. And the fact that people break the law without enforcement shows the collapse may have already occurred. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. over at youtube.com/Timcast. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.